Alright, so in this series we're going to be covering ExpressJS. If you already know JavaScript but have never used node.js, then Express is a great starting point to building websites, web applications, or even just creating a REST API for some other application you're working on. If you don't know what any of this means, then don't worry, we'll be covering all of these topics as we move through this series, but I do highly recommend you do know JavaScript, since all Node.js really is a JavaScript runtime environment that allows you to run JavaScript outside of your browser. If you don't already have Node.js and NPM installed, then before going any further, you should head over to nodejs.org and get that installed. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump right into it. Alright, so first thing you're going to want to do is to create your directory for your project. I'm going to put mine in my home directory under projects, YouTube, and I'm going to call it express01. After that, you can go ahead and open up your code editor. I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code, and you want to go ahead and open up that directory you just created. Alright, once you got that all up, you're going to want to open up a terminal and go ahead and run npm init. And you could fill this out if you want. I'm just going to leave it blank for the time being because we can always update this later. Next, you're going to want to create your entry point for your application, and ours, I'm just going to name index.js. You can name this whatever you want. Another common naming convention people use is app.js. If you open this package.json, just make sure whatever this file you created matches whatever is in the main here. So in our case, we're just going to use index.js. Alright, so once we have that all set up, we can go ahead and start installing our dependencies. So the first library we're going to install obviously will be Express. So you can do npm install or just npm I express. Alright, and once this is installed, we can go ahead and get started writing code here. So we're going to first include that library we just created. And we're just going to call it Express and do a require Express. Once you got that required, we're going to need to create our app instance here, which just takes the function express, which comes from this library. And then we can set our port. In our case, I'm going to be setting it to 3000. And then the last thing you really need, just to get an example up, is your app.listen. And the first argument this function takes is your port, and the second one is going to be a callback. And I'm going to be using ES6 syntax here. I'm just going to go ahead and do a console.log. Server running on port. Make sure these, if you put a variable inside your string here, make sure you're using backticks. If you're not using ES6 syntax, you can actually just do this, which will be the same thing. Right there. I'm just going to go ahead and Control Z that. I think ES6 looks a bit cleaner, so I'm just going to use that. And now we can go ahead and go to our terminal and type node index.js. You should see server running on port 3000. If you go ahead and open up your browser, go to localhost 3000, you'll see cannot get /. It's actually a good thing. That shows us that the library is working because we haven't set up any routes yet, so there's nothing to serve up here, so it's just going to give us a 404. If our application weren't running, you can go ahead and stop that with Control C. I'm going to go back and refresh this page, and you'll see we get a much different error. Localhost refused to connect. That's because we don't have a server running on port 3000 anymore, so it doesn't have anything here to respond. Also, another dependency we're going to install, we're actually going to install this globally. You don't have to do this. I prefer to do this so that we don't have to keep restarting the server every time we make a change to the code. Is an application called NodeMon, which I believe just stands for Node Monitor. To install that, you should just do npm I, the G flag for global, and NodeMon. That's going to install it globally on your system, so it should be available wherever you're at in the terminal, whichever working directory you're in. And then from there, you can just go ahead and type, instead of node index.js, you can do nodemon index.js. You'll see a few debugging stuff here. And if we were to make a change to the code, let's say we want to change it to port. Actually, let's open this back up, refresh. You can see the server's running. Go ahead and change this to 4000, save it. When I hit save, it automatically restarted our application, and we could see server is now running on port 4000. So if I were to refresh this, not found, 4000, there we go. Alright, I'm going to change this back to 3000. I was just giving it a little demonstration there. And the first thing we're going to cover is routing, because you need to be able to route your application in order to serve up pages or post data or whatever. There's a few different methods for routing. There's your app instance, and then .get. The rest are .post, .put, and .delete. These are all functions here. And I believe all of them, for the first argument, they take the path or the route, and then the second argument will be the handler function. We're going to primarily be using app.get, at least for this part in the series. Later on, we'll cover more of the other methods later. But for now, we're just going to create a route for /, which is just going to be our home page, and then the handler function, which once again you can do function the old school way like that, and then feed it request and response. You can name these two arguments whatever you want. This is just a common naming convention here. Or if you're using ES6 syntax, you can just use arrow functions, as so. And then once we're in here, actually make sure you put these back in, request and response. And then request is going to be when someone goes to this path here, which is just /, just the home page at localhost. This request variable, this route is going to get called, this function here. And it's going to pass over these two variables, request. If we were to do a console.log on request, and then I'm going to clear this so we have a little more space. And if I were to go back to the page and refresh on port 3000, it's just going to load forever because I didn't send a response. So it's just going to keep loading there until it times out. But you can see that once we went to the page, you can't actually see it all here because it's too long, so it's getting cut off. But there's a bunch of stuff here. There's a bunch of methods or functions and variables as well that we can access, which is all regarding the request sent over from the client. And then also there's response, which is similar. It's going to have some methods we can use to respond to the client that is calling the page, so that you don't just sit here loading forever. So we're going to go ahead and just do a simple res.send or response.send. And then in here we're going to say hello world. We're going to save that. You can see our application restarted. Now if we go back and load this, we see hello world. And we're not just stuck here loading because we actually sent a response this time. Alright, so that's going to be it for this part. Super short, super simple. Just got our hello world application running. And in the next part, we're going to be covering routing a bit further and splitting up our code, because we're not going to want all our routes in this one file here. We're going to want to go ahead and split that off into subfolders and subfiles to make our code a bit cleaner so we don't have this one large file for our application. Hope to see you guys there in part 2.